All right, so live data, right, from an anonymized customer. Right, that's what it says, demo1.nyansa.com. And really what I want to focus in on is, kind of what we've been talking about, what Keith brought up as an example, which is what are, when we think about workflow, right? And so GT mentioned service desk, network operations, network engineering, IT executive, or IT leadership. Let's take a couple of those roles and actually go by step to see what they would actually do. And how analytics, again, is going to make that workflow, that existing workflow, a lot more efficient, first of all, and how it's going to enable new workflows that folks didn't even have before, right? So where I want to start off, so typically what we do is when we go through a demo, we kind of go through every single feature that's there. I know like a lot of you guys have already seen that before, and so that's why I kind of wanted to focus this down into specific workflows. And so the easiest one to start off with is Service Desk, because it talks about a single client issue, and that's going to sort of give you guys a sense of what kind of data that we collect, as well as sort of get us going when we get to network engineering. But in terms of a single client workflow, the way that typically works is somebody calls in, so everything is searchable in the product. Somebody calls in with a problem. What's the user that? I looked up a user before this. So user 434778 at acme.edu, right? So for some reason, yeah, it's not resolving very well on the screen. But these are all the different devices that this user has. So typically the way the workflow would be, okay, you have a PC, you have a Mac, there's a Galaxy phone here, there's other kinds of devices that this user has. Which device are we talking about which is having a problem? Maybe you can't connect, maybe it's slow, all of that, right? And you sort of try and solve this guy's problem. That's a typical service desk workflow. Give me a Mac, give me a username, give me an IP address, look it up, and then I'll go and address that. And I'll do that in a second. I'll show you guys how now with sort of the things that are in the product, how that workflow is a lot more efficient. The proactive version of that, just before I get into that, right, is down here. And one of the challenges we have is operationalizing this, and that's something that we're working on. But the notion of a person can call in and complain after they've had a problem. They're probably already angry and they already have the problem. Or the product itself down here, as an example. So this specific user 434778, the product has noticed that this user has been having problems over and over and over again. So on the Radius side, he's tried to connect to the network in 78 different hours. And I'll get into what we call sort of one of these hours. In 78 different hours, this guy's tried to connect to the network. In 57 of them, he's failed, right, in the last 2 weeks. From a Wi-Fi perspective, he's used Wi-Fi in 194 different hours in the last 2 weeks. And in 176 of them, he's had poor performance, right? So this is one of those things that maybe this guy's called in, maybe this guy hasn't. But the product is now surfacing clients to the service desk team that potentially they can reach out to before they actually have to call in and say, hey, this is, what's going on? The product has noticed that you've been having this problem over and over again. Let's kind of look into it. So this would be the proactive side of it. And now I'll talk about sort of the reactive and how that gets a lot more efficient as well. Any questions, comments, by the way? I mean, feel free to just interrupt and just ask. But maybe it'll come up as I go through this reactive workflow, right? So the reactive workflow, as I said, is you type in the username and you say, okay, what device is it? It's my PC, that's problematic. Okay, let's click on that. Let's go to a page that's optimized specifically for troubleshooting this particular client and for service desk in a lot of ways. But it's useful for other functions as well. So the first step, again, so going step by step by this is, okay, what time period have these problems been happening over, right? So everything is sort of, all the time is sort of controlled over here. So let's say, okay, this has been happening, at different times over the last couple of weeks. All right, so let's change the time. And, so what that's going to do is sort of look at this client now from the perspective of the last 2 weeks. And now step one from a service desk perspective is, okay, quickly check some of these attributes to see if they're kosher. So if I open up this SSID as an example, this is the SSID that he's on right now, but on July 24th at 11 a.m., he was on this other SSID. Maybe that's okay, maybe that's not, right? IP address. This is the one we see currently, but in the last 2 weeks, he's been given a lot of different IP addresses. Is that okay or is that not? There's sort of like requirements here, right? Radius server, right? Maybe this guy's got the wrong radius server configured. This is the one he used most recently, this radius2.acme, but he used these other two radius servers. What are those? Maybe that's the root of his radius problems, right, in terms of what he's seeing, right? VLANs, et cetera, et cetera. So the first step to this is, okay, open up to the time frame that you care about, check the attributes to make sure that they are company appropriate, or like they are like sort of the best practices of that enterprise. So that's kind of step one. Oh, thanks, man. The next step is we collect data on every single connectivity transaction that every client has with the network. So this timeline sort of contains all of the data every time a client tried to connect to the network. So, as an example of this is, if the problem was, look, I can't connect, tell me around when you couldn't connect. Okay, around 9:30. All right, let's see in this timeline what it says around 9:30. All right, let me open this up. So at 9:40 a.m., the product actually noticed that you did connect, right? You did radius, right? You did DHCP, you ARP for your gateway, you did DNS, and you were actually able to transmit a packet off your network, right? So this is kind of giving you that ability from a service desk or a client troubleshooting perspective to say, look, I know exactly what your client has been doing. Let me try and follow along. So if you say you couldn't connect, this thing says you could connect. Maybe it's the application that you're trying to use. Maybe that's the thing that can't connect to its server. Let's get into that and let's kind of talk about it there. Right?
So I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
There's a lot of great information. Do you have kind of a role-based system so you can allow certain people to see some of it? Because again, that's a lot of information. You don't always want your help desk guy and they're going, oh, what's wrong with the access? It's like, don't touch that.
So this was actually the result of, kind of going through that iteration. So there's role-based.
Okay.
And the notion would be, and what I didn't show you guys was the service desk dashboard. So even that dashboard that I showed initially is not where service desk would start. They would start off as just a client troubleshooting workflow. Here's a search box, search for clients. Here's some recommendations on clients you can search for.
Very cool.
And then you kind of come to this. But yeah, I mean, what's been interesting about this is that even among service desk folks, there's different tiers and different levels of expertise. And so this is kind of our attempt to sort of club that together and say, look, the different tiers, these are the steps you go through. And each enterprise is going to be different. And they're going to publish a different set of rules to say, no, go through this step and look for these attributes, look for these things on the timeline. And I'll show you guys in a second, which is really the thing that's probably resonated the most, which is this a client issue or is this a network issue? And prove to me that it's a network issue before you escalate this thing, right? Any other questions, thoughts?
On that last statement, is there any, try to figure out how to word this right, is there any fundamental programmatical bias built in to how you approach things that most problems are going to be client, most problems are going to be network, or does that really not apply?
So I think that the network is where we can observe, right? So the infrastructure is giving us data. We're seeing data on the wire, right? So our way of saying it's a client issue is by kind of eliminating the network. That's kind of our, if you want to talk about sort of
and
bias.
the reason I'm asking is like from a network, support, network design, network person perspective, we build good networks. The vast majority of problems are going to be the client. If it's truly a network that we've built and we believe in. That's why I'm asking that question. We tend to implicitly go to, or at least I do, generally you've got a client issue because all the other clients around you are good, and let's look at you. And
so let's talk about that, because now we have the data for you to prove it, right? So let me close this timeline up. And that gets us to sort of the third step of a client troubleshooting workflow, which is, okay, there are these different problems over the last 2 weeks that we detected for this client, right? There's a radius issue, there's this Wi-Fi issue, and so on, right? For Wi-Fi, these are the general things we've noticed for this particular client device. These are some of the root causes: interference on 5 gigahertz. Over all the different hours that we've noticed this client have this problem, these are the most common attributes, and so on. So that's just kind of a summary of this client. But the key point to what Lee said is to say whether this is a client issue or a network issue. The way we're going to arm you guys with data for that, and the ability for you to see that, is if it's a network issue, other people on the same access point, other people on the same SSID, other people in the same building, they need to be having that issue as well. It can't just be one person having the issue and nobody else having it. Now, these are going to be different depending on the type of problem that you're looking at. For Wi-Fi, it's the things that I just mentioned. For DNS, it might be VLAN. Are other people on the same VLAN having the same problem? Are other people on the same DNS server having the same problem? For Radius, other people on the same Radius server, and so on. So I'll talk about that. But did you have a question, Ro? Sorry.
So you have a crawler, which is wired into the network, which is also sending data to the cloud. How do you know that it's interference on a specific band, like an RF interference?
Gotcha. So hold that question for 1 sec, because I think when I go into network engineering, we'll go into exactly what symptoms we look for and things like that to say these root causes. We just didn't want to get into that detail for this screen because of, to your point, if you're trying to troubleshoot a client and we're talking about layer 2 retransmits to them, then it's probably not a good situation. But down here, these are all the occurrences of this Wi-Fi issue. So let's go through that as a first example. So the next step in this workflow would be, all right, I've looked at the attributes, you're okay there. I've looked at the timeline, right? All right, we can verify exactly what's going on here. Tell me about when you think this problem was worse. Give me a time, right? Okay, so let's talk about maybe earlier today, at 8:30 today, right? Or we could have even gone yesterday and so on, right? So okay, let's look at Wi-Fi. That's the thing that's selected over here. Issue that you had at 8:30 today. Other people on the same access point. So 2 out of 4 people had this problem on the same access point. 5 out of 28 in the same building had the same problem. 182 out of 2,300 had the same problem on the same band at the same time that you had it. So every enterprise is going to have a different threshold for this, right? And so you're going to, maybe the threshold is going to be, look, if only 4 people are connected on that AP, I kind of don't want to hear it, right? That's too small, right? Maybe at least 50% of other people have to have this issue. And maybe at least 10 people on that access point or 10 people in this building or whatever have to have that problem. But the idea is you quickly click on the time and you quickly determine, are other people having the same issue at the same time? And it better be the case that they are if you're going to escalate this, right? If that's not the case, then either redirect the ticket to a client troubleshooting team like a desktop team, or maybe just drop the ticket on the floor, right? Because there's no point escalating it. There's nothing on the network that I can do about it, right? So this is kind of our take on how to determine whether it's a client or a network issue, which is that we have the data about every single client in the network, and so we can quickly say, or sort of give you the data to say, is this just affecting this one client, or are other people at the same time having the same issue as you, right? And as I said, so this is one example here. If I do Radius, you're going to get a different set of things here, where what's important now is a Radius server. Obviously, if you're looking at a Wi-Fi issue, you don't want to, you don't care about are other people on the same Radius server having the same Wi-Fi issue. But for Radius, you do, right? And for DHCP, again, you might care about VLAN and so on. So questions, thoughts, comments? What do you think of our take?
It still feels like it needs somebody who knows what's going on. I mean, I still feel like there's another step that's missing, which is, okay, fantastic, now what?
Now what? Right. So, some of this, okay, so that's fair, right? The thing is, if it's a client issue, you're actually never going to get that, so now what, right? Because your client, maybe you have too many applications on it. Maybe
Sure,
you
sure.
have,
Yeah, but pretending that it doesn't fall in that bucket of ignore, right? Let's say it's been raised to something that's a bit more severe.
Yep.
That's fantastic. You're still talking about packets and radius, and what's the help desk guy? The help desk guy may know how to spell radius, but that's probably where it stops, right? If this is a help desk centric
They wouldn't
tool,
use caps.
what's that?
They would not use capitals. So
They may not use right. Yeah, they may get one of the letters capitalized.
yeah.
Again, now what? Right.
Right. So typically, the way. So by the way, a lot of this stuff has come from interacting with different customers and looking at their workflows. And so in this particular case, the enterprise workflow is okay. To Keith's point, there's a document somewhere there that says, okay, if you're a service desk or whatever, these are the steps you go through. And if you get to the now what step, right, of, all right, it is a network issue, right, or something like that, then at that point you probably do have to escalate, right? Because typically what ends up happening is the service desk or whatever user just isn't equipped to deal with that anyways. And so it's like escalate. And then, we'll talk about that other workflow, like the more complex workflow there in a second. But this is really to just quickly let you go through step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 in this particular case and say, look, at this stage, you've proven or you have at least some proof to say this is a network issue versus this is just a one-off client thing.
Sam, would your question be answered? I mean, it would be great if the answer was just, it only had like one sentence on the screen and 72-point font that said, go do this.
No, it'd be even
that's our
better if
goal?
there was a fix it now button.
Just remember that thought in 3 years when we're presenting.
Exactly.
Maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
Is there an answer that would be acceptable to you that would say education? Some sort of end app or external education for how to handle what they see on the screen. Because I agree, I want to be exactly where you just said.
Education's always the key, right? Now, can you make them actually read it and then prove that they've gone through the CBT training and yeah?
No, that's totally.
I mean, there's a yeah.
Yep.
But to Sam's question, though, it kind of makes me wonder, remind us who you're aiming this at. Is this aimed at people like us, or are you truly trying to give the help desk, with, different skill sets, if any, at times on the help desk? They might just be call takers. Are you trying to give them a window into the wireless and enable them to make decisions and draw conclusions and dispatch whoever to fix it? So, I mean, who is the target audience for
Of this page?
Yeah.
Sure, for this page.
This is targeted to you as one, because all of you are going to have to troubleshoot individual client issues at some point. But this is what we call a service desk page, meaning that we want the help desk to use it. And part of the operational challenges that I mentioned before is that, we get feedback from a lot of organizations. It's like, just like you guys kind of said, this is a really complicated page maybe.
Yeah, and I think for what it's worth, I would never in a million years give anything like this to my help desk. Ever. Never.
Okay.
And it's not to their discredit. It's how we're structured organizationally. So it's, our help desk has certain responsibilities, and analyzing and making decisions about what's going on isn't one of them. But that's just us. And I don't know if maybe we're unique. They're more call takers, gather information, pass the information that they've gathered, MAC address, IP address, when and where, time, description. Maybe they can reset passwords and actually do some things that are more user task oriented, but they absolutely are not in a position to be trying to troubleshoot from afar. And we just don't give them these views.
Where does that go? Where's the next line? And you're not unique, by the way, so this is an important question for everybody.
So it depends on the nature of the problem. It would either get passed to one of two network groups for them to analyze.
And would this be appropriate for them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I'm saying but they are not part of the help desk. They are part of the network support group. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It comes down to kind of how you're structured organizationally. Okay. So I'm just mentioning that because I don't know if maybe in you guys' minds there's like a universal model of the help desk.
So is there, and again, now I'm asking for product guidance here, could you sit there and circle, if I printed this, you could circle the 4 things you would want in a help desk screen. I only want to see these 4 things. Is that something that, is there nothing on here that would be helpful?
No.
Or is there?
Well, for the help desk, they're not getting this. You can
I'm talking about
show
a new
me a
screen.
picture of a flower, and I'm not giving it to them.
Okay.
Well, you know, it's
But for my group and, you know, the network support group, this is great because it's like, you know, X number of digs into Cisco PI and a whole bunch of Splunk digging. You've done it all for me here. That's wonderful. But again, the help desk doesn't do any of that stuff either.
Okay.
Yeah, but Lead, same point is if my help desk sends me a ticket and they don't have a lot of this, I kick it back to them and said, due diligence, go back and get that information.
Right, and that's what I was thinking too. From a consultation point of view, we have a lot of clients who have IT generalists that tend to call and go, this feels like it's a network problem. and you know, and to some extent, there's some clients that'll never get it, but there's some clients who really do want to. Okay, what should I have checked before I called you? You know, and even more junior guys within my consultation organization as well, who come in and go like, "Is this a wireless thing?" You know, Brandon, and I go, "Well, you tell me.
Yep.
What have you done? You know, and most times it's like, did you ping anything? Can you hit the gateway? Can you hit externally? You know, do your DNS resolutions work? These are all the questions that I ask, and you know, more often than not, you know, the guy comes into my office or calls me up, and I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they turn around and go back. Right. So I get what Lee's going. You know, maybe I wouldn't find this appropriate for a tier 1 help desk. I would find it more an intermediate, like the guys who don't waste my time. Do the data collection for me and determine whether or not you really need me.
Yeah.
Well, and the problem is that every organization is obviously different. You've got some organizations where help desk is big red switch, right?
Yeah.
Or have you rebooted it? Have you done fill in the blank? And then other organizations are really expected when they escalate to say, oh, I see here that I'm getting some failure that says peep something or another. I don't know what that means, but here, go have fun looking, right? You almost need to have a framework that can be customizable to every organization. Yet, you know, if you give people a framework, they're going to say, well, I don't want to spend the time and energy and effort to customize a framework to fit my solution. It's a bit of a catch-22.
So here's the way we build this, actually, to sort of put all these comments together. We designed this page actually working with folks like you, network ops, network engineering, right? In the sense of the basic problem they wanted to solve was everybody's just escalating stuff without diligence, without any level of diligence to the points that were just made here, right? And what am I going to do with that? Most of the time, I don't even have time to look at it, right? So how can I control those escalations and make people do a little bit more diligence? And you guys are,
You know what,
oh, yeah.
I think I see what you're going at. It was occurring to me in my head, not to oversimplify, but it would almost be like if in the bottom corner there could be, you know, a dial that kind of, depending on the rest of the metrics, skewed a certain percentage towards network versus client.
Yep.
I could see client, I mean, especially because when clients call me, you know, the meter starts, right?
Yep.
I could almost see it, you know, them saying, look, you know, do not call Brennan unless that meter is at, you know, a 60 or above.
Yeah. That's true, right? The other, I mean, in addition to that, by the way, that's the next step, right? So at each step, the goal is to simplify. So the previous client page we had before this was way too complicated for anything, right? And if you think about sort of the pages that existed before that, you think of Cisco Prime, you think of products like that. I mean, can you expose that to a help desk? And the feedback we've gotten is that no way, right? It's way too complicated. So at each step, the goal is to make this simpler and simpler while still being able to address sort of like some breadth as well. In terms of, you know, we talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. This is sort of, you know, like as an example, depending on the enterprise and depending on the organization, maybe, you know, certain help desks, this is the only thing they can look at. This one box at the top. So you can close all these boxes, by the way, down here, right? So forget graphs and charts.
And just to kind of give you some feedback here, it's really hard to see what's on the screen right now. So when you say this might be,
I'm sorry. Okay.
By all means, go into a little detail because I can't read what you're pointing at.
Oh, absolutely. So what I'm pointing out here are these are the different attributes that this client has had. And so one of the things is clicking on any of these attributes. So this says username. Will basically let you see what the user used last time we saw him and what the user has used in the past, right? So these are all the usernames we've seen him use. These are all the IP addresses that we've seen them use, and so on. And so maybe for a certain organization, it's like that's all you look at. Just check the attributes. These are the attributes that are kosher for our environment. We don't use Comcast DNS as an example. If you ever see like a DNS that's outside of this, just that's the problem, and you go and fix it directly.
So, I mean, I like the escalation part of it. It almost seems like you need to build a ticketing system into it as well. Because to me, it's like when it becomes something that maybe Lee could use is the fact that it's like, hi, I have an issue. They're like, I look up the client, and like to Brendan's point, I have a dial, and it's like my help desk goes, okay, it goes over there.
Yeah.
Or like even tracking to the extent going like, these two help desk guys like to escalate tickets a lot, even though.
Yeah, now you're starting to track your help desk.
Exactly. So absolutely. So what's going to show up here very shortly is a native integration with ServiceNow, as an example.
Okay.
Of just create this ticket or update this ticket, that kind of thing.
Is it going to be exclusive with ServiceNow, or are you?
The first one we're starting with is ServiceNow because it's the most common one, but the goal is to add more.
So I don't want to rush you on, but I mean,
Sure.
we started the presentation talking, and this is what we're seeing from a lot of analysts. Data. And what I got really interested in at the start of the presentation was you guys said, okay, and now can we make reasonably useful recommendations and then measure the impact? And I'm really excited to get to that part.
Perfect. All right, let's do it, man. I'm going to use that as the segue. So let me go back to the dashboard. So we've talked about Service Desk, we talked about reactive, we talked about proactive, right? There are absolutely certain things we need to add to this to make it even more operational, right? One of the things we didn't talk about on the recommended client side is only recommend me clients that are in this particular area because that's the area that I care about, or that I've tagged as VIPs, as an example, right? So there's other things. ServiceNow integration or ticketing system integration is another thing. But these things are all coming, right? So on the network engineering side, let's first go through sort of the reactive workflow and kind of, learning how you have a question, how do you answer and get insight on that question and what's going on there? And then talk about how do we flip that and how do we give you recommendations about questions you didn't even have. So where I'm going to start there is this last card over here on the dashboard. So we take all of the different locations in your environment and split them out and order them by which locations have the best user experience by Wi-Fi, right? And so I'm going to click on this one just because it's a bigger area that I'm familiar with. So, this is really hard to read, so I'll just explain it. So it says Geary 66, whatever. That's the location. Over here, it said 23%. And the way to read that 23% is basically in this location, this is some building in this environment, 209 people showed up here simultaneously in the last week. And that happened several times in the last week when 209 people showed up or thereabouts. And whenever 209 people showed up and used Wi-Fi at the same time, on average, 23% of them had poor wireless experience. That's the way to read this, and that's how this was ordered, right? So that's kind of the starting point. Over here is just some additional insight into what are some of the apps that were being used there, and what percentage of the time were some of those apps getting negatively affected by Wi-Fi, right? And so I'll skip that for now because I want to sort of focus on another area. But part of that is correlating application performance with wireless to say, it's sort of that secondary impetus to say, okay, not only are we having wireless, but important apps are being used in this location. And when we notice those important apps being slow or poor performing, the cause of that slow performance or poor performance is wireless.
Just as a matter of quick feedback, when you jump into a demo and you say, hey, we're going to show off this neat thing and we're going to show you how we're going to go drill onto a problem, and you say, we're going to go over into this box that's on the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, and we're going to bury down through a bunch of widgets, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like when you start with something that's way off on the right-hand side and you've got to expand down to a bunch of stuff, if that's important data, it should be front, or at least on the left. I mean, I'm a left to right kind of guy, so when I look at this and it says advisories on the left and problems on the right.
So, one of the things, it's funny, right? Because one of the things we realized very quickly is in dashboard design, you have to be targeted to the specific user and the specific workflow. there's no dashboard that everyone can be happy with across, service desk, operations, engineering, et cetera, right? And so what we have here is sort of, you could almost call it a placeholder to say that this is, what we're trying to show here is all the interesting data that we have and all the different concepts that we expose. And we're still sort of working on, how exactly to show that. But really where this comes down, if I click over here, there's going to be different dashboards for different users. So from an operations perspective, it's going to be information that's all about real time, like what's happening right now, what clients are affected, what areas are affected. A dashboard for service desk, which we already have, is all about client troubleshooting. A dashboard for engineering is all about stuff like, all right, let's take your environment, let's divvy it up, figure out where problems are, let's give you recommendations and all that kind of stuff. So as we sort of do this,
These are
I think you'll
dashboards
start
that
to
we build and customize.
No, we'll build the initial versions of them.
Okay.
Long term, we'll sort of add customizability, but
But the other side of that is that Anand's taking you from driving from a dashboard down. Sam's use case is not going to be from there.
Yes.
You're going to go right into where Anand's going to go here,
Yeah.
which is the analytics portion of the product, which is not dashboard based. It is very specifically, I want to look at long-term things, like Brennan wanted to know. Those are the kind of things that really are located elsewhere. So this is just more of a demo glitch, I would say, than a product one.
Okay.
So let me jump into it. Let me click details here. So what this kind of takes us to GT's point, again, so it's a very specific question that I'm now analyzing. I'm looking at Wi-Fi performance from the user perspective, just when they show up in this particular building, this Geary building or whatever.
Can I ask
Yeah,
a
sure, no
quick question on you're saying a particular building, and you call it an AP group, but depending on how you structure that, that's not just a single building. That could be 3 buildings. That
Totally.
could be an entire
Yes.
site. That's
Yes.
I have an AP group for all of my fire stations.
Perfect.
Or-
One AP group.
Yeah.
Or if I have an AP group for low density and an AP group for high density. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
So how do you?
So that's where the secondary concept comes in of custom groups. I happen to know that this particular environment has divvied their AP groups to reflect actual buildings. That's why I keep referring it to a building. But to your point, many AP groups are just RF profiles, right? And they have nothing to do with any kind of physical location. And that's where you would get into defining custom groups. And one of the things we've talked about also is the ability to dismiss some of those locations that aren't locations, that are just profiles that you made for one reason or the other, and just focus on the things that are locations, because those have physical meaning, right? So that's how it's done. And these custom groups can be defined by AP regular expressions, which is sort of the most common way that people do it, where it's like, okay, any AP that matches building 1, floor 2, star, correlates to that location, right? Any location that that has another regular expression.
So is there a way to remove that? So say, for instance, in your filter reports, I just want to see the custom groups. I don't even want to see the AP groups.
Yeah. So that's part of the next step of operationalizing it, like ignore/dismiss these particular things.
Thank you.
Right? Yeah, no problem. So the thing I want to talk about real quick here before I get into recommendations, there's a bunch of stuff about baselining, benchmark. I'm gonna skip that because we've kind of talked about it before. But obviously it's a very important aspect of the product that GT talked about. But the real key here, in terms of understanding what we're doing, right? And I'll talk this through just because. Let me zoom in one more level to see if people can read it a little.
This is starting to look like what should have been on the top left of that page a second ago.
Right.
Maybe Sam feels differently, but I suddenly saw this and went, ooh, that should have been back there.
All right, fair point. So what are we looking at here, right? What we're looking at here is, in this particular building, this Geary building, we saw 4,977 total client hours of poor wireless experience that users had. And the way we sort of define a client hour is one client having poor experience in 1 hour is one client hour, and we just count those up over the last week, all the hours in the week, and all the clients that sort of accessed wireless here, right? So that's total number of client hours. So it's like a man hour or a kilowatt hour is sort of the way to think about it. Now, what was going on in this building in terms of root causes? So the way we determine root causes is for 43% of these client hours, the symptoms that we saw was that, okay, there were high layer 2 retransmits, that's why this is an X. These clients were all on 5 gigahertz, right? there was no rogue interference from other rogue APs when these clients were having this problem. There weren't a lot of other simultaneous users on the same AP radio at the same time that these guys were having problems, and so on and so forth. And so we basically take all of these symptoms, and the presence or absence of those symptoms give us what we say is our potential root cause. So we say, okay, for 43% of the problem in this library, the root cause is interference near the client on 5 gigahertz, right? The second most common root cause, because this other symptom sort of 2.4 gigahertz shows up, affecting 35% of the problem, is interference on 2.4 gigahertz. And the third most common problem, affecting 19%, is co-channel interference on 2.4 gigahertz, because this additional symptom of these guys are on 2.4, and at the same time these guys were having problems, we detected that the APs that they were on saw other APs on the same channel that they were in terms of a certain signal strength level, right? So what this lets you do is you came into the product with a pretty complicated question of what does user experience on Wi-Fi look like in this particular building, this Gary building, and what is going on and what percentage of the problem is due to what, and how are users experiencing it, right? And so what this gives you is sort of high-level information about what is going on here, right? So, we know that, about 50% of the problem is just people on 5 gigahertz having issues, but the other 50% is potentially 2.4, and part of it is co-channel interference. But the second thing is it lets you correct anecdotes as well. So anecdotally, somebody might be like, look, if we fix this co-channel interference on 2.4, it's going to fix wireless for everybody in this location, right? This is going to sort of set those expectations to say, look, it's going to help significantly. We should absolutely do it, but it's not going to help everything, right? And so
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm finding, I don't know if anybody else, I'm kind of finding the checkmark and X icons kind of confusing.
Okay.
And I think I've worked through most of them, but for instance, just for curiosity, the 5 gigahertz band, something is wrong with it, obviously, but what?
No, sorry, yeah. So this is extremely confusing, and this is the one where we need to change this. But so in general, we use presence and absence of symptoms as check marks or X's.
Right.
And so for 5 gigahertz, the easiest thing for us to do was to say check mark if he's on 5 and X if he's on 2.4. So that's what that means. So the X here just means that he was on 2.4.
Oh, and see, I kind of assumed that it must have been implying there was an issue in the 5 gigahertz band, and in things like neighbor interference, I'd want to see it was high, or low. Okay. So I think you got it. I asked about it, and you said this is extremely confusing, and that was the issue that I was having.
That one in particular, absolutely. The idea is for any of these things that you can kind of click on it and get help as to what exactly it means. So that's sort of hopefully addresses it. But okay, so where I wanted to go here is kind of, as I said, this is kind of one reactive workflow. And you could be looking at Wi-Fi by an SSID, by a band, and sort of get this kind of insight as to what exactly is going on. But the thing that sort of this enables, and this is something we have not released yet, right? It's in beta, right? So, and that's why a lot of the times we put beta features under hidden links in production, right? So we tell certain customers to kind of play around with it, right? So I'm manually replacing this and kind of showing this off. So imagine all of these client hours now, right? In terms of, okay, we see all these client hours in an environment. And now, rather than you coming in with the question of saying, look, I want to know what experience looks like in this building, on this floor, whatever, and you had to have the question, there's another view of this, right? Which is, let me zoom out a little bit, or zoom back in, okay, so that you guys can read it, right? There's another view of this, and I'll explain what the stuff on the left is. The stuff on the right are basically actions to be given to you, and the bang for your buck that you're gonna get for doing those actions. So what this reads here, right, is the top one is, if you alleviate high co-channel interference on 2.4 near this particular set of access points, right, then you can potentially mitigate 2,000 client hours of poor wireless experience that people have had over the last week.
That's cool.
Right? If you can alleviate poor coverage, so this is the other thing that's a little hard to see, but as I hover through these, you can kind of see them get highlighted.
But you have to,
on the left.
they don't know what that
Oh,
is.
that's true. Thank you. All right. So what the visualization on the left is all the APs in your environment, and the reason that they're close to each other or far. Let me just close this out, right?
I mean, if I could eliminate co-channel interference in the Orion belt, that would.
Exactly. So these are basically all your APs. The number of client hours that people had problems on an AP for is the size of the circle, right? So an AP will look bigger on this if more people had issues on it, right? Versus smaller if people didn't have issues. And the reason they're placed together, like these connections, are based on neighboring information of saying, okay, this AP can hear this other AP, that's why these are close to each other. This AP can hear this other AP.
And the blobs are simply APs, or do they represent switches, routers, devices?
So these are AP groups. So all of these guys, so let me zoom in here, right? So I zoomed in here.
Yeah.
If I click into this, right? So this is kind of hard to see that there are lines between APs, right? But all of these APs in this blob are from the same AP group or custom group, if you guys define it. So they're meant to sort of define a floor, a building, a location.
So when we heard earlier, Nyansa, not a Wi-Fi infrastructure analytics company, but our Constellation View is just APs?
So this particular beta version is
I was
just
just
for
asking
Wi-Fi.
for.
Yeah, we're going to be adding in DHCP, adding in Radius, adding in Skype for Business, adding
Switches, routers.
Exactly. Switches, routers, that kind of stuff. Yep. Absolutely.
Does it imply then we're not necessarily tied to geography in any way? Like this isn't.
So this is radio geography. So the next step for us is going to be maps and things like that, and placing it like so that you can visualize this in a different way. But what you're looking at over here in terms of this constellation, to your point, right? Hopefully you guys can see different shapes. There's the Big Dipper's over there somewhere, right? Is basically the radio adjacency of all of these locations.
Could you repeat what the lines represent?
What's these ones?
Yeah.
So it's basically from one group to another, like so one building to another as an example, how many APs from one group can hear another group? And that's sort of making us place these AP groups close to each other versus farther away and so on, right? So think of this as kind of your map of all of the different APs and all the different locations, and this will be more obvious when we actually place it on a map, right? And then the number of issues that clients have had in these different locations, right? To sort of
Standalone little baby constellations are perhaps a remote office that can't hear anything else.
Exactly, or they're buildings that are far away from other buildings.
I feel like this has a lot of potential, especially if you were to overlay, potential for issues and like, hey, this clump over here, if has something that should be going wrong, right?
Yep.
If you overlaid a whole lot more infrastructure things into it.
Absolutely. And again, that's where we're going, right? And so the idea here, and in general, the way we release features is sort of we release a V1 of something, right? To sort of, to kind of whet your appetite, to kind of see some of the value but obviously it's going to be harder for you to do so. But our V2, our V3, is meant to simplify, and sort of give you guys more and more value in a simpler way. But the crux of this though is again proactively. So one way reactively I talked about come in with a question, right? Oh, what does performance look like here and what's going on, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. Proactively, you can come in here and you can just get recommendations. So you can see different parts of this light up, and those are where the different areas that are affected here is happening. Right, so as an example, if you can alleviate high co-channel interference, right, if I open this up, these are the different APs that were affected, right, and this is how many client hours are on it. This is the bang for your buck that you're going to get for it, right? That's one recommendation. Another recommendation, this is ordered by the most number of client hours. So it's basically saying, what are the areas in your environment where the most number of clients are experiencing bad issues due to one of these root causes? Right, so alleviate poor coverage on 5, in this particular area, right, in this portion of the constellation down here, right, then you can get 821 client hours back, right? Do this action here, right? So these are just some of the actions. I can kind of like show you guys some of the other actions alleviate interference from rogues in these different areas that you can potentially get back those client hours. There's noise and all those kind of things. And we try and be a little, how should I say, not so strongly worded here in the sense that, here as an example, we say alleviate interference from rogues, which is really just taking the root cause of rogue AP interference when these clients are having bad performance and just adding the word alleviate or mitigate in front of it, right? Initially, we kind of started off being far more strongly worded, shut those things off. Or, in the case of coverage, add more access points. In the case of code channel on 2.4, shut off 2.4 gigahertz radios. And a lot of the feedback we got from folks like you were like, actually, you don't quite know our environment. There may be reasons we have those things in our environment. And so you can't be so strongly worded there, because I need to take that and actually interpret it. And so, point taken. And so that's kind of why we've taken this.
Well,
one of the things we might add are maybe potential remediations.
But really, the goal should be to reduce the number of client hours so that it falls to the tail end of the list. It's not to drive it down to zero. It's to make it not be the top.
Exactly.
Is there a way to take, I love the visualization. It really helps see things, and I would love to show it to a customer. But what I'd like to see is a before and after.
Yeah.
To justify, because sometimes those suggestions cost money.
Yep.
Or resources or time.
Yeah.
And to be able to justify it, to say, okay, here's where it was before. We lopped off the top 5. It cost this much. Is there a way before I do it to show me a before and a predicted after?
Yes. So, okay. One of the things we're adding to this is sort of a very obvious track this button, right? I'm going to take this action and I want to track it, and I want you to keep track of what happened before, what happened after, and all that kind of stuff. There's another one which is going to be dismiss, which is another point that folks have brought up, which is that some of these things, like rogue access points as an example, in a university environment, I can't even, what am I going to do about it as an example, right? So just dismiss all recommendations of that type. But the way we have tracking today is by baseline. So one of the things in that previous screen at the top was your baseline of when this many clients came to that Geary building, what percentage of them on average were bad, right? And seeing that sort of how that changes before or after an action is one way to do it. There's another way we're going to add, which is that we're going to maintain this sort of view of how many client hours did a particular area have before and how many does it have afterwards, right? So you can get very, very granular because sometimes the locations that you predefine aren't going to be granular enough, right? Maybe you've done it on a building by building basis, but then this action really is just the corner of the second floor in that particular building, and I only want to track it for those particular APs, right? But the idea here in general, though, is to allow for all of that. So the workflow here, now getting back to that word, would be, either you come in with a question or you come into the product and we just point some starting points out to you and say, here are just some actions you guys can take, right? Where there are a lot of people getting affected by these problems, and you're going to be able to proactively improve experience by just taking some of these actions, right? And again, adding this for wired and all that kind of stuff as well.
I like distilling it down to client hours. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like having something where you can describe in one phrase or one word, this is the impact to your organization.
Right.
I like the way that's.
The first thing, when the guy showed this to me a while back, I said I just want it on a map. Campus maps where, again, all these APs are on maps. And that's in the works. Because there's also deeper analysis when you know that two APs are physically connected, or that one is really close to the entrance and it's a high roamer but not high persistent connections.
Yeah, it's almost inevitable that somebody's going to say or start to relate it to in this case maybe they can't because the geography isn't there, but to be able to see these are all my sites that are right next to the airport.
Right.
Yep. And certainly, but so are you guys going that far? And it's like what I'm seeing here is alleviate code channel interference.
Yep.
I'm wondering if there's any instances maybe you're not there yet where you're going. We're seeing a lot of DFS hits on this channel specifically. Consider taking that channel out of the plan, or we have kind of a high noise floor in this high density area. Consider RxSOP,
Yep.
you know? Which
Yeah,
is a little more
so
targeted.
the goal here is for any of these recommendations to add a ton more information in here. So today, all we're doing is just putting the APs that are affected and how many client hours we saw. But as an example for co-channel interference, it would be information like, what are the APs that are interfering and which ones can hear each other at the highest signal level, right? What are the channels available that I can change this to, right? To your point about DFS and things like that. So there's a lot more information, a lot more depth that this can go. The goal first, again, sort of our V1 version of this is just, let's give you guys some starting points based on our analysis of the data. And so it's almost like, again, sort of that Netflix analogy of it's recommending movies to you. Maybe you decide you're not going to watch that movie, right? That it said, oh, go watch John Wick. But then you're like, but Keanu Reeves, let me go check out what else he's, done in the past, and let me go watch Speed 2 or something like that, right?
I have another question with this. I like that you've extracted the data, you have these ideas. Can you tie it, and I know you tied it back to, we just upgraded code here. Can you tie it back to, RRM just changed these 3 channels, they were the cause of it.
Yeah.
You've got the hooks into the controller,
Yep.
either ARM or RRM, to know what's causing it, because when it says alleviate, that alleviation might not
You
have
might
a
know
problem.
what to do. You're
You
right.
already know what
Yep.
caused it.
Yeah.
So the root cause isn't this. The root cause is that RM made a bad choice.
Right.
You would love to see that in the product.
Well, no. Actually, the end
Just want
result.
to discredit our.
No,
Yes,
no.
basically.
What I'm saying is, the end result is, if you know that, then your feedback loop goes back into the controller and tunes RRM automatically. That's where I'm headed.
True.
Do you guys have any visibility now into some of, is Spectrum data, for instance?
We know everything the controller knows.
We know everything that the controller.
So if the controller, if a clean air EP is detecting a microwave, you guys can see that,
Yep.
the non-Wi-Fi stuff.
Yep, absolutely. So as an example, if we recommended something to you regarding noise, then we're going to tell you what clean air told us about that noise, right? And what it potentially could be, and so on, right?
Ultimately, if they could turn off the breaker to the microwave from the dashboard, that'd be pretty sweet.
There you go, exactly. We're talking a real full integration.
That's a full stack.
He's not asking,
That's
he's
full
not
stack,
asking for
exactly.
much. I mean,
What's that?
he's not asking for much.
Can you now
Oh,
control the
absolutely.
HVAC at the same time?
I'm trying to kind of think in the future here a little bit. You guys are asking for things that make complete sense. But if a year from now we do this again and we're like, hey, look, it'll automatically fix, are you guys going to bitch at us then and be like, dude, I don't want you automatically fixing that. What are you doing? I'm thinking, is that, I have trust issues, right? We all have trust issues with software. And I'm, thinking the same thing. When is there enough trust there that could happen? I don't know.
I think it's a phased approach. The trust in the beginning is leave the human in the loop, but let me know.
Right.
And the more times you see it and it fixes, and I just hit okay, and pretty soon I don't have to hit okay anymore.
Yep, exactly.
The show me what you're going to push to my controller. It's like, ooh, yeah, don't do that.
Right.
Or at
a
least
good
right
point,
now.
Leave that checkbox at the bottom that when I finally trust it, I can go, yes, I don't need to see that anymore.
We're trying to avoid that. Hi, Dave. I turned off the.
Exactly. 2.4 users were causing us issues, so they're no longer.
But I feel like I want to reinforce maybe Jake's point. And that's one of the things. There's some simple tools around for firewalls. Even when you get into the GUI. And you start clicking buttons. One of the greatest things I think is the ability to, when you hit apply for the firewall, the GUI to pop up and say, "Here's what I'm gonna do." That last setting checks a thing. So I wouldn't mind having buttons in the dashboard that say, "We can do this for you."
Yep.
But when you hit go, this is really at a command line level what we're gonna do to your device.
Yep.
But there's people who aren't us who know that. There's a much bigger population of people who are like, alleviate there. I don't know.
Yeah,
They don't even know how to do that.
That's where role-based
So-
access comes in,
So,
right?
so also make
exactly.
a button that allows you to roll it back too.
So one of the things that I've I work with a few of our customers, and every customer is very different with their domain knowledge of how they want to handle problems. So where I'm going to go, and Anand's going to kill me because I always try to dictate roadmap, is what if it was customizable? What if on the screen it says, hey, I want to, when this happens, this case, I want to execute this. whether that's from the help desk perspective all the way up to ops and engineering.
Well,
Is
then
that-
you could take it so far as, blink, Jake, Nyansa is calling you because Keith's trying to push the disable RRM.
That's right, exactly.
Keith actually emailed me just during this and said he wants a Keith quote tool for how many client hours he can use. We can do that, that's no problem.
Exactly.
I made that up, by the way, he didn't actually do that.
I'll take it though.
So we have about 15, 20 minutes
Yeah,
left
absolutely.
just to make sure you're,
Yeah,
I don't know what
yeah.
else you wanted to go through, so.
Yeah, no, I think at this point, just discussion would
Okay.
be useful. Feedback.
You guys talked
and
about
ideas.
measuring the impact. Do we have any kind of concrete examples of that? Can we show here's
Should do an annotation
here's
or
the
show an
constellation
annotation.
before, here's the constellation after?
Yeah. So I'll just open this up in another screen in case we want to come back to this.
So the constellation doesn't have that part yet, but we will, remember that I told you about the attributes where make a change and then you can see the before and after. That's where Anand's going to go to show you that.
Just to queue up a question while he's working on that, from online, how do you understand and capture poor coverage area without having actual sensors?
What's that?
So you have
How do we find out a poor coverage area without having sensors?
For sure, right? So it goes back to these symptoms, right? So signal to noise ratio being bad for a client is what we map to coverage, right? So we map signal to noise ratio being bad, but noise floor being okay. We say, okay, that's a coverage issue.
But you're purely
because-
guessing
that could
on
easily
that.
be that a
that's
client's
an assumption.
sticky and
But-
he's on the
but
wrong AP.
But
That's not a
but
coverage issue.
there is identifying an issue there. If you have an AP that has 20 clients on it, 17 of them are rock solid, everything's good, 3 of them are having signal to noise issues, you have a problem. One of them is likely not a coverage problem, they're just wandering outside your network coverage area. Number 2 is you have a roaming issue. Something is happening where you have a coverage, but the other is, coverage is, we do, what's the word I'm looking for?
History.
We're figuring it out without sensors. And again, I do to Lee's point earlier, if I could put sensors or an agent in every client, boy, we'd deploy that as soon as we could build it.
A sticky client will look like a coverage issue. Someone else will say, "Oh, I need to turn up power."
So that client
unrelated.
history though, there's,
Yeah. So one of the things we also do, actually, let me just go back here for 1 second, back to this. So one of the things I didn't show you is there's an Explore mode even in this. And you can say, okay, if you go to the Explore mode and you decide to put in filters, you can filter by show me where there are client hours by different root causes. And show me, just on these SSIDs, just for these operating systems that I care about and so on, you can apply that, right? And so over here, we actually have a root cause called sticky client, right? To exactly the point that you said. And the symptoms we look for there is bad signal to noise ratio, but the access point that the client is on sees a lot of neighbors around him, right? And this persists over time. And so if we see that pattern, we'll change it from coverage to sticky client, right? So that's the way we do it, right? So it's kind of like the presence and absence of the group of symptoms that matters. In a similar way, it's like if signal to noise ratio is bad, but the noise floor is also really high because of an HVAC system or something like that, that's not a representation of poor coverage necessarily. That's your noise is really the problem there. On the other hand, if the noise floor is very low, but signal to noise ratio is bad, and the AP doesn't have too many neighbors, then it's a coverage problem, right? And so we sort of have this mapping of these different sets of symptoms to the different root causes.
Just your explanation of that, I think your target audience, you just lost them all. But we got it.
Exactly.
But that just as a feedback to the UI, even the discussion of how that happened,
Yep.
they're going to see if you just say coverage, they'll try to solve it a different way. If you said sticky client, they'll go, can I add another AP to make it go away?
Right, exactly. No, that's fair, right? That's where it comes in. Should we make recommendations on what to do about it? Even that's dangerous, right? Because the sticky client, okay, go and configure your RRM parameters around what's the minimum threshold for clients to be able to connect or whatever, right? Like those kind of things. Is that a good recommendation to give to somebody that doesn't really understand it?
Do you have enough big data here to come back and say, yeah, it's actually the Intel ProSat version this,
Yeah.
that sticky clients are across, that issue happened to all Intel ProSets across all places. that's the driver we need to fix.
So in general, that's a trick in terms of information and correlation, right? So, sort of taking us all the way back to the beginning, the reason we use information we get from the infrastructure and kind of stop there for now, right, is because it's the lowest friction deployment. It's like, to GT's point, you put a crawler in there, 30 to 60 minutes, you're up and running and you're seeing data, right? But there are pieces of information that you can get that you can't get that way, right? So we talked about sensors earlier, right? A sensor can pick up information that, that the infrastructure doesn't see. Similarly, a client agent, an agent on the client, can pick up certain information about that client, how many apps are running on it, what's its CPU, what's its memory, that kind of thing, that potentially the infrastructure can't see. So another thing about where we're going longer term is to keep adding data sources to this. So if that's what you want, right, like a correlation down to the driver level, like the Intel Pro set point that you made, if client agents can pick that up and you have those deployed, then absolutely send us that data too, and we'll correlate all that together here and say, okay, where are my client hours of problems, just for the devices that have this particular driver, right? And show me just those client hours. Show me client hours for, other kinds of things that we've collected. But the goal is to keep adding data sources to be able to do that.
On that topic, adding data sources, and I think GT's words were, if we could put a sensor in every client, we would do it. At least in Cisco land, right, the Cisco-Apple relationship where iOS will be reporting sensor data back to the infrastructure. We now have shipping code for that. How long before we should expect to see that data show up in the dashboard?
Yeah, so absolutely. So in terms of conversations with the infrastructure guys, right? So Cisco, Aruba, et cetera, right? The goal is to do something where every time they add data in, right? So we talk to them, right? And the goal is we extract whatever data they're willing to expose outwards, right? Whatever they're willing to expose SNMP-wise, whatever they're willing to expose in other APIs and protocols. We will take that data and sort of analyze it.
Well, it's a different message than what you said previously, which is if the controller knows about it, we know about it.
No. So, okay. So that's true. So that's the rule of thumb. The controller knows about it, we know about it. I'm sure that's not true in every single case wherein, like as an example, there's probably stuff you can find via CLI that isn't exposed in any SNMP API, right? I'm sure, right? And so if that's the case, okay, that's a corner case where the controller does know about it, but we don't necessarily know about it because it's not in any kind of consumable API, right? But one of the side parts to sensors and things like that, one of the things we think internally is, look, the guys that are building the infrastructure are probably going to add better and better data in their infrastructure too, right? And so we're agnostic to all this. We'll take data from anybody, right? And so whether the infrastructure guys give it, the sensor guys give it, whether it's client agent guys give it, we'll take it, right? And our differentiation is really the analysis, right? And that's kind of sort of some of the stuff that I'm showing you guys here. But of course, the analysis can get richer the more data that you have.
Some simple examples of that I've built internally is I take all access point models and put their capabilities. Right, this model is a 2x2 11N. That should be treated differently than a 4x4 AC or AX coming out, right? Because that could give you information as to, hey, this 2x2 11N's loaded up. It's going to need an upgrade. That's an example piece that that's a simple data set that's put in the back end.
Given that actual idea, do you show on one of these, we're getting an average MCS of X? What were the APs capable of? What were the clients capable of? And the clients might be, the throughput number could be 65 and that's not meeting our SLA, but that's all the iPhone's going to get as a ratio between the two. Because they're never going to be, the actual throughput number doesn't, it could be good or bad depending on what those ratios are.
So those are particularly the type, some of what GT just talked about in terms of like publishing the capabilities of APs, there's another side of it, publishing the capabilities of devices as well, like iPhone 6s. But iPhones, that'll be relatively easy because the platform is the same. With Android, it's like there's so many different hardware platforms for it. It would have to go down to like the chipset or whatever if you had that information. But add that info in here and then talk about, one of the things that I haven't talked about also is, everything that we do here is all root cause based. It's like, okay, for this particular root cause that's affecting these client hours, what's going on, and what can I do about it? But there's another side of this, which is just give me visibility too, in terms of just tell me the average MCS, tell me the average signal to noise ratio, tell me the average layer 2 retransmits and stuff like that. A lot of that raw data is actually in the product. So I just haven't shown you guys it. It's kind of buried, right? In the sense that whatever you guys want to see that we collect is all here, and you can see it in terms of graphs. Some of the feedback was make those graphs more usable, like I can zoom in, I can sort of see correlations and stuff like that. But all that data is there.
Don't forget the annotations thing that you were.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So very last thing, so I'm just going to switch back to this. This was that view of that one building, this Geary building, over this particular time. And what we're looking at here is the baseline. So again, I think the question was asked before, how do you guys do baselines? It's always with respect to a load level. So when 198 people showed up here, what percentage of them typically have poor performance? And so if I hover over here, the performance in this particular building is around 24%. You'll see holes in the data. That's not because we stopped collecting data. It's just because those are the weekends where these people didn't show up. But then there's this notion of annotations where, okay, if there's a configuration change made, or if you want to manually annotate something, so this has nothing to do with Wi-Fi, so somebody did this
Incorrectly marked
correctly or whatever, right? But the notion is you take an action, or you take or you manually annotate this. The annotation shows up and does a before and after comparison of the baseline, so that you can explicitly go and prove, hey, this reduced this baseline. This made the average performance less.
Yeah, if you can't read this, this says percent affected, and then it'll tell you the percentage decrease, hopefully decrease, or in this case, there's a slight uptick, which because DHCP has nothing to do with Wi-Fi.
Yeah, exactly.
And then down here is where you can add an annotation, so you just click the caret, and then you can manually add one, or controller stuff will automatically come in there.
That stuff automatically pops up there.
So automatic annotation of RRM changes as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. So stuff like configuration changes. It's just in this demo environment.
No, not an RRM change.
What's that?
Not an RRM change.
If you change the configuration.
If we, yes. If
Oh,
a
sorry.
human
Yeah,
changes
but
the config-
automated controller changes, right? Control plane stuff where the controller's making
automatic.
a-
So
yeah.
we track all of that on an AP by AP basis. So the same kind of event timeline that we saw for a client, there's an event timeline for a controller as well, or sorry, for an AP as well. To say, oh, this AP, saw a radar event. This AP saw a frequency change. This AP saw a transmit power change. All of that gets annotated under every single AP.
Right, and you can see that.
I can show you guys that.
Yeah, it's everything that AP has gone through.
Yeah. I'll show you guys it real quick. So this is an Aruba environment, so I'll just pick one of these APs. And there's this notion. One of the things that we're doing is sort of we've changed the look and feel of the app like in like midstream. That's why some of these pages you see are kind of different. But down here, these are all the things that this AP went through in terms of all the events, right, that we saw for this.
So do you get more detail out of that? I mean, yeah, it did channel change from 149 to 48.
Yeah.
You can drill in and see why it did that change?
So that's the next piece of information to add here, right? Was it because of, error? Was it because of high power, that kind of thing?
Because ARM said so.
Well, that's
I mean, I'll take that. Just a reason. Did I change it or did?
Well,
No, the
well, that's a
controller
little
actually
bit-
tells us that.
right, it is a little bit manual because if it's a human change, then it'll show up in an annotation. I know that's not ideal, but right here, this is an RRM change, and I know that because it wasn't set in the Wi-Fi one. Because the Wi-Fi would have an annotation that said you made the change.
To bring those together.
Yeah, that would be nice
annotation
too.
And also show on this page is something that a human said they did right in between there and there.
There's one thing, if you don't mind showing, we have a few minutes left.
Sure.
One thing I love is in the client page, the custom set of graphs from the client perspective. So when you talk about bringing a lot of information together, I know that this is, I'm kind of,
So one of the
with our
things,
last
by the
few
way,
minutes
I just briefly mentioned that the service desk would start from their own dashboard with role-based access. This is the dashboard that they would start from. It's like bookmark of previous clients that they've searched for and suggested problematic clients that they could potentially look at. And that's it. They don't get to see anything else in the product.
So what happens if you click on one of those clients?
Yeah, so when you click on one of those clients, you get to the client details, and that's it. That's the limit of their, right? And so,
So if you go back to that previous page for a second, so the first 6 is a search history, okay, and beyond that is clients that the application is recommending may be problematic?
Exactly. Yep.
And from the client page, and the reason I wanted to show on the other one, the actual client page that I wanted to show this, is because when you guys talk about correlating information, I just want to show you, since this is like the latest page that the team has built, that you can see things like this, where if Anand hovers over it, you'll see that any timeline will match all the others, so you can see, I want to see correlations there. But the custom set is where I want to see how did DHCP affect, so you can choose any chart that the client has gone through. I want to see how each one of them maps to each other in the same way that you see that. So imagine that for exactly what you guys were asking is, okay, I want to see how this AP change match with a TCP. One of them, I'm kind of jumping ahead. Here's another.
Retry rate to MCS.
Sure.
Right?
Sure, if that data is there, then.
Absolutely. Yep. Exactly.
Another one is roaming. That I like the roaming example where it says the reason this roam failed is because we had a bunch of TCP fins.
Right.
Right. So we saw layer 2 actually worked fine, but right after that, TCP started breaking.
So you were just on that other page where you saw like a transmit power change. You can come in here and say, show me the transmit power changes relative to what happened to this client.
Right.